They fired me on a Tuesday. Not even a Friday, like a decent coward would do. No, they picked the middle of the week right after I fixed a cascading server failure that would have tanked a major client demo. One minute I was pushing a final commit, the next I was staring at a Zoom invite titled Strategic Alignment Touchpoint. That's corporate speak for, "We're about to get you," smile. They didn't even let me log out first. I was still watching the Jenkins logs roll like I always did, tracking uptime like a hawk when HR popped in, all pastel sweaters and fake sympathy. "Elena, this isn't about performance," she said, like that would soften the blow. "It's just realignment." Realignment? I was the alignment. I'd spent 7 years holding that infrastructure together with duct tape, caffeine, and sheer force of will. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just blinked once and asked, "Is this happening because I made things work too well?" No one answered. They didn't have to. Jonah, the new VP with his vision board buzzwords and zero actual clue, just smiled like this was a promotion for him. I walked out without saying a word. No rant, no tantrum. Just silence. But inside, something cracked. Not like a breakdown, no. More like a lock finally clicking open. And in that moment, I realized they didn't fire me because I failed. They fired me because I made it impossible for their chaos to keep hiding. I was too efficient, too respected, too much of a threat to their mediocrity. If you've ever been punished for doing your job too well, if you've ever been told you're not a fit right after saving the day, stick around. This story's for you. Because they thought they were ending something that day. But what they really did was start something they couldn't control. When I first walked into the company, the server room was a mess literally and metaphorically. Deployments were still manual. Someone had to physically click buttons, update spreadsheets, and pray that nothing broke before lunch. Monitoring was a glorified email thread, and incident response was whoever answered Slack first. They didn't hire me to lead DevOps. They didn't even really know what DevOps was. They just needed someone to make the tech stuff smoother. And I said yes because back then, I thought building something meaningful mattered more than job titles. I didn't ask for much. Just the space to solve real problems, and maybe some seat at the table where decisions were made. So I got to work. Week by week, I rewired their infrastructure like a surgeon fixing arteries in the dark. I implemented CI/CD pipelines that cut release times from days to minutes. I automated the workflows no one even knew could be automated. I was the reason their midnight crashes stopped. The reason we could onboard new clients without holding our collective breath. And yet, no one ever said my name. When leadership sent out company-wide emails about our improved stability, it was the CTO who got the applause. When sales bragged about 99.99% uptime to close deals, it was marketing who got the bonuses. When a junior engineer once asked, "How does everything just work now?" the VP leaned back, smirked, and said, "That's the magic of great leadership." I wanted to laugh. Or scream. Maybe both. But I kept my mouth shut. I kept solving. I kept delivering. Because for a long time, I believed that doing great work would speak for itself. That someone would eventually look past the peacocks and see the gears grinding behind the curtain. Spoiler, they didn't. Instead, I became the invisible net that caught every fall quietly, reliably, thanklessly. Every time something almost broke, I was there. Every time someone else took the credit, I swallowed the bitter taste and kept typing. It wasn't pride that kept me going. It was purpose. This system, the one no one really understood, was mine. Every line of automation, every alert that pinged before disaster struck, every line of YAML and Terraform. That was my fingerprint, even if no one saw it. And yeah, I tried to push for change. I wrote documentation so clean even interns could onboard themselves. I proposed mentorship programs. I flagged burnout patterns in team retros. But my suggestions always got filed under. Let's revisit next quarter. I wasn't flashy. I didn't speak in buzzwords or decorate slides with stock photos of people high-fiving. I just did the work. And somewhere along the way, I became convenient to forget. Because when systems run well, people assume they're effortless. Like the silence is natural instead of engineered. I didn't realize it at the time. But we'll promote you next cycle, every time they passed me over for a seat at the table. They weren't building trust. They were teaching me how disposable I was to them. And still I stayed. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, I could build something so solid, they had to see me. I didn't know then what I know now. Some people will drink the water you purify and never once ask who cleaned the source. Jonah Blake arrived on a Monday. Of course he did. New VP of Engineering. New vision. New buzzwords. Same clueless energy wrapped in a Patagonia vest and a handshake that tried too hard. From the moment he stepped into the all-hands meeting, I knew exactly what kind of leader he was. The kind who smiled like a politician, talked like a TED Talk, and listened like a guy waiting for his turn to speak. We're gonna pivot our culture into an agile forward mindset, he said that morning. What does that even mean? No one asked. We just nodded like hostages taught to play along until it was safe to breathe. Jonah talked a lot about disruption, about innovation, about how velocity is the new currency. And but when it came time to actually do things, he didn't understand the basics. Not just of code, but of people. Of how we worked. Why we worked. He scheduled a meeting with me in week 2. Said he wanted to understand our DevOps process. I thought, finally, someone's curious. I was wrong. He opened the meeting with, why are we using Terraform instead of something more future-proof? I blinked. Because it works. It scales. We've invested years in this stack. Henno. He frowned like I'd just kicked his golden retriever. Well, it's not exactly visionary. I stared at him. Neither is changing infrastructure just to say you did. Jonah didn't like that. You could see it in the way his jaw clenched before he forced a smile. He wrote something down. Probably my name underlined twice. Still, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I documented our pipelines. Built him an infographic. Even explained how our deployment flow worked from CI triggers to rollback protocols. I used short words. Diagrams. Patience. He nodded like he understood. 2 days later, he hired an efficiency consultant to audit our systems. The consultant asked me how to log into Jenkins. Enough said. That month, Jonah cut our test environment's budget by 40%. He canceled one-on-ones. And introduced a new dashboard filled with OKRs that made no sense to anyone except him. It wasn't about optimization. It was about control. He wasn't here to lead. He was here to be seen leading. Jonah measured success by meetings held, not problems solved. He loved phrases like aligning verticals and building momentum. But every time production hiccuped, it was my phone that buzzed, not his. And still, I stayed calm. I kept the systems running. Kept my mouth shut in meetings where he pitched tools with names longer than their documentation. I watched him perform leadership while I quietly preserved actual stability. He was the face. I was the function. And every time he talked over me, or dismissed a concern, or praised a solution I quietly built without credit, a little piece of trust fell off the shelf. I didn't know it yet, but Jonah wasn't just careless. He was dangerous. Not in the cartoon villain sense, but in the way insecure people in power always are. By needing to prove they matter more than the people who actually do. It happened on a Wednesday. Of course it did. The middle of the week quiet enough to avoid suspicion, close enough to the weekend for HR to vanish by Friday. I had just finished debugging a flaky deployment issue that had been haunting the QA team for days. Pushed the patch. Ran the tests. Everything green. I leaned back in my chair, finally breathing out. Then it came. A calendar invite. No subject line, just touch point with Jonah and Allison, 3:15 p.m. No agenda. No prep doc. Just vibes. Bad ones. Still, I told myself not to overthink it. It was probably just another awkward check-in. Jonah liked to schedule those, mostly so he could monologue about alignment while sipping kombucha like it made him wise. At 3:14, I clicked the Zoom link. Jonah's camera was already on. Hair perfect. Smile preloaded. Allison from HR joined a second later. Neutral background, neutral face. My gut dropped before anyone spoke. HR never joins a meeting unless something's about to happen or end. Hey, Elena. Jonah started, all cheerful poison. Thanks for hopping on. We just wanted to have a quick sync on some organizational realignment stuff. Realignment. That word again. I swear they keep it in a corporate drawer labeled pretexts. M2. Allison chimed in, soft-voiced like she was narrating a sleep story. This isn't performance related at all. You've been absolutely valuable to the team. Been. Past tense. But due to some budget restructuring, we've had to make tough calls, and unfortunately, your role has been impacted. I didn't blink. Didn't speak. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make them squirm. Then I said calmly, "Is this because I wouldn't endorse the tool Jonah pushed last week?" Jonah's smile twitched. No, of course not. This was already in motion. Sure it was. I nodded. Okay, so when do you need my offboarding done? Allison looked momentarily surprised. As soon as you're ready. We've prepared a handoff checklist, and your access will remain active through Friday. I smiled small, sharp. Then I'll leave it cleaner than you deserve. They blinked. Jonah cleared his throat like he had something wise to say. Really appreciate your contributions, Elena. You've helped build a lot of what we rely on today. I tilted my head. Funny, you never said that when it could have changed anything. I logged off before either of them could reply. No dramatic exit. No final words. Just click, and then silence. I sat there for a long minute. Not angry, not even shocked, just hollow. 7 years. No warning. No conversation. Just one Zoom call with two polite faces pretending this was inevitable. But under that quiet, something was already stirring. The apartment was too quiet. No Slack pings, no calendar chimes. No Jenkins alerts begging for attention. Just me, a lukewarm cup of coffee, and my cat Toby perched on the bookshelf like a tiny, furry judge. He blinked at me slowly, like even he couldn't believe I was home this early on a weekday. I didn't explain. He wouldn't have bought it anyway. I dropped my laptop bag on the floor and sank into the couch still dented from late-night on-call shifts and Sunday morning stand-ups. I didn't turn on the television. Didn't scroll. I just sat there, staring at the ceiling like it owed me something. There wasn't sadness. Not yet. There was just quiet. The kind that feels like it's pressing on your chest, not heavy, just noticeable. Like gravity, but personal. Part of me expected the grief to hit immediately. I'd just been fired. Shouldn't I be crying, screaming, calling someone? But I felt blank. Toby leapt down, patted across the carpet, and curled into a loaf by my feet. I reached down and scratched behind his ears. He purred. At least someone still needed me. For the first time in weeks, I opened my personal laptop. It had dust on it. Actual dust. That's how long it had been since I'd had the time or the energy to think about anything that wasn't work. The screen came to life. Familiar wallpaper. Untouched folders. And then I saw it. A repo I hadn't opened in months. A project I'd started long ago in the margins of my insomnia. Firebird. The name had been a joke back then. Something I typed into GitHub at 1 a.m. after a deployment crisis made me question the meaning of life. I didn't even know what I wanted it to be. Just something better. Cleaner. Less corporate nonsense, more actual building. I double-clicked it. Code stared back at me half-finished, half-forgotten. But still there. Still waiting. I ran my fingers across the trackpad, pausing over the folder names. There was something poetic about it, really. They'd taken my title, my access, my seat at the table. But they hadn't taken this. They didn't even know it existed. I hadn't looked at this project since before Jonah arrived. Back when I still had hope that maybe, somehow, things would change from the inside. Back when I thought loyalty would be rewarded and effort would be enough. Clearly, it wasn't. I leaned back, closed my eyes. And that's when I felt it, not sadness, not rage, but clarity. Clean, cold, necessary. They hadn't broken me. They just unburdened me. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't the end. Maybe it was the first moment of something that was mine, completely. Toby stretched beside me and let out a tiny sigh. I opened my eyes. Then I opened VS Code. The cursor blinked in the middle of the screen like it was daring me to move. VS Code was open. Lines of forgotten code sat there, half-baked but brimming with old ambition. No deadlines. No Jira tickets. Just me. And the fire I'd buried. Firebird. It started as a Jokia working title typed during a sleepless night, back when burnout felt like a badge of honor and not a warning sign. But looking at it now, it didn't feel like a joke anymore. There it was, the skeleton of a platform I dreamed about during midnight outages and micromanaged one-on-ones. A DevOps toolset that wasn't bloated with vanity features or locked behind sales demos. Something built for engineers, by someone who actually gave a damn. I hovered over the README. The last commit message made me laugh. Someday, maybe. Someday. I cracked my knuckles. Today sounded better. Fingers hit Keyshezidon at first, like they were knocking on a door I wasn't sure I was allowed to open. Then faster. Line by line, I remembered how to breathe through the syntax. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close. But it was mine. All the things I'd been forced to shelf, ideas dismissed in meetings, features shot down by people who couldn't spell YAML. They had a home here. And no Jonah to overrule them. The deeper I got, the more everything else faded away. The sting. The silence. The empty calendar. None of it mattered when I was building again, not for a boss, not for a brand, but for something real. Something clean. Uncomplicated. Human. I didn't know if it would go anywhere. Didn't know if anyone would care. But I cared. And that was enough to start. There's a kind of peace that comes from making something with your own hands, even if no one ever sees it. Like planting a seed in the middle of a burned field, not because you expect it to grow overnight, but because you need to try. I kept coding. A new directory. A cleaner deployment flow. I sketched a UI in Figma. Not flashy, just functional. New gamification, new over-designed dashboards. Just buttons that did what they promised, and config that didn't lie. I worked until the sky outside turned soft and blue with early morning. Toby had long since given up waiting for me to go to bed. I was running on leftover adrenaline and decaf coffee. But I wasn't tired. I was awake. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting on permission. I wasn't asking for approval. I wasn't trying to fit into a system built to ignore people like me. I was building something better, even if no one knew it yet. Have you ever built something out of rage and love at the same time? Hit like if you know that feeling. Because this wasn't a project anymore. It was an escape hatch. A battle cry. A blueprint for a world I still believed in. And this time, I wouldn't let it die in the draft folder. I didn't plan to tell anyone. At first, Firebird was just between me and the blinking cursor. A quiet rebellion stitched in code. No roadmap, no funding, no logo. But something about finishing that first working build flipped a switch in me. It didn't feel like a side project anymore. It felt like a signal. And I knew exactly who to send it to. I hadn't spoken to Ron Decker in over a year. Last time we talked, it was over greasy burgers and a production outage at 2 a.m. He was running an e-commerce startup back then, and his deployment pipeline looked like it had been duct taped together by raccoons. I helped him stabilize the whole thing in a weekend for a fraction of my rate. Back then, I called it loyalty. Now, I call it proof of concept. I shot him a message. Hey, got something you should see. It's early, it's raw, but it's real. Drinks? He replied in 3 minutes. Still owe you one. Tonight? We met at a dive bar that hadn't changed since 2009. Same neon buzz. Same burned wings. Perfect place for bad ideas that somehow work. I didn't pitch Firebird with slides or branding. I just pulled out my laptop and showed him the bones. Simplified deployment. Transparent metrics. No gimmicks. No bloat. I talked about what it wasn't as much as what it was. Not another overfunded DevOps Frankenstein. Not a platform built for VCs instead of engineers. Not another tool that makes you feel like an idiot for needing documentation. Ron leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing not with doubt, but with calculation. How much would it take to get this off the ground? I hesitated. Gave him the smallest number I could live on. He smirked. Double it. My eyebrows shot up. You'll burn through it twice as fast as you think, he said, sipping his drink. You always did underestimate your own worth. I didn't argue. The wire hit my account the next morning. I stared at the notification longer than I needed to. Not because of the amount, but because of what it meant. This was real now. Not just code in a folder, but a foundation. Next, I called Mel. We were college roommates for 2 years. She went to law school. I went into infrastructure. She now runs a boutique firm for startups and occasionally threatens to sue dating app creeps for sport. I texted her one line. Hey, I need to incorporate a company before I accidentally go full vigilante. You in? She called me within 5 minutes. No small talk. No fluff. Send me the docs, she said. You're not getting sued on my watch. She didn't charge me for the initial filings. Said it was her way of flipping off corporate bro culture. God, I'd missed her. Over the next 72 hours, I barely slept. I spun up servers, registered the domain, drafted the first version of the careers page. It wasn't perfect, but it pulsed with intention. The kind of thing you only write when your hands still remember what being burned feels like. I wasn't building a company. I was building a way out. Not just for me, but for anyone who'd ever felt buried under other people's titles. And for the first time since that Zoom call, I wasn't alone. It started with a ping. Just one. No subject line, no warning. Just a single message from a name I hadn't seen in weeks. Maya R. Junior engineer. Sharp, quiet. Always carried a notepad like it was armor. I used to find her hovering near my desk with scribbled questions and a nervous smile. I taught her how to write her first deployment script. How to troubleshoot without panicking. How to breathe through chaos. She hadn't messaged me since the day I was let go. Most people hadn't. I opened it, not knowing what to expect. It said, I applied. Can't stay there without you. Just that. Simple. Direct. And it hit me harder than any layoff ever could. Because I hadn't asked her to leave. I hadn't recruited anyone. I hadn't even told her what I was building. But she knew. I read the message again. Then again. Somewhere in the back of my throat, something cracked. I didn't cry when they fired me. Not when Jonah smiled through it. Not when I packed my desk in silence. But now? Now I felt it. Because it meant I wasn't invisible. Not to everyone. Maybe I hadn't just been a cog, maybe I'd been the thread holding things together. The next message came 5 minutes later. Daniel, another engineer. Is Firebird real? Maya said it is. If you're hiring, I'm in. Then 2 more. Then 7. By the end of the day, I had 11 pings. Some cautious. Some desperate. All from people I used to work alongside, people I thought had moved on. They were watching. Waiting. Looking for a door. I hadn't announced anything yet. No LinkedIn post. No company launch. No press release. Just a whispered rumor from someone who remembered how it used to feel when work had meaning. And the part that stunned me? I didn't have to chase anyone. I just built the door. And they walked through it on their own. One message read, Tell me the part where I don't have to sit through another vision sync with Jonah while he explains Agile like he invented it. Oh, another said. 20% more pay and zero fake stand-ups? Are you hiring or starting a cult? I laughed out loud in my kitchen, toast in one hand, phone in the other. Toby stared at me from the windowsill like I'd finally lost it. If you've ever wanted to walk out and build something better just because you know it's possible, hit subscribe. We're just getting started. By Thursday, 3 engineers I deeply respected had sent resignation notices to Jonah. They hadn't even seen a full prototype. Just screenshots. Just intention. But somehow, that was enough. One of them ended their email with, "They never saw what you built, but we did." I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. What I felt was alignment. Not the corporate kind. The real kind between people who were done pretending the system worked. And this was just the beginning. By Friday, the castle had started to shake. Not literally, of course. The office still had its glass walls, overpriced snacks, and those smug motivational posters no one ever read. But beneath all that polish, something was cracking. I didn't hear it from HR. I heard it from a Slack message. A former PM sent me a screenshot. Urgent, all hands scheduled for Monday. Topic: retention and culture alignment. Classic Jonah move, pretend the building isn't on fire by holding a meeting about the wallpaper. He had no idea how bad it had gotten. 3 engineers had already left. 2 more had interviews booked. And I wasn't doing anything. No poaching, no pressure. I didn't need to. Because once you see the door, you can't unsee it. But the real twist came Saturday morning in the form of a LinkedIn alert. New job posting. Senior DevOps lead, Austin, Texas. $240 K year plus signing bonus. I stared at the screen. Same title. Same responsibilities. Almost word for word from the role I'd just been fired from. Except this time, they were offering double the salary. Plus relocation. Plus perks they swore didn't exist when I'd asked for them. I sat down on the edge of my bed, towels still in my hands. The audacity didn't surprise me. What stunned me was the desperation. Suddenly, they valued the role. Suddenly, they realized it wasn't just a line item. They'd built the whole system on top of my decisions, my scripts, my logic trees, my process flows, and never thought to ask how it all worked. They just assumed it would keep humming along, like magic. But magic has a cost. And they'd just cut the magician loose. An hour later, my phone rang. Jess, one of the most cautious, apolitical PMs I'd ever worked with. We hadn't talked since the layoff. She opened with no greeting. "You lit a fire here." I blinked. "That bad?" She exhaled. "Jonah pulled everyone into an emergency sync yesterday. He called it a mission realignment moment. He was sweating through his shirt. HR's been scrambling with counteroffers. I didn't say anything. Didn't need to." She went on. "And the thing is, it feels good to watch it burn. But it also feels sad, because you tried to fix this. You fought for us. They just couldn't see it until it was too late." There was a pause. And then, softer. "I wish I'd left with you." That one hit deeper than I expected. Because it wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about all the moments I stayed late, the documentation I wrote no one read, the burnout I flagged that got brushed off with a smile. I used to think the silence meant I wasn't enough. But now I realized. The silence was them pretending everything was fine, because I kept making it look that way. And now that I was gone, they could finally hear the systems creaking. And those cracks? They weren't just in the servers. They were in the culture, in the leadership, in the illusion that everything had ever truly worked. It showed up in my inbox at 9:03 a.m. on a Monday. Subject line: concerning professional conduct. Sender: Jonah Blake. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it for a solid minute, sipping my coffee, letting the subject marinate like a threat pretending to be polite. I already knew the tone. Corporate speak wrapped in passive aggression, dipped in plausible deniability. Eventually, I clicked. It began exactly as expected. Hi Elena, it has come to my attention that several of our team members have recently chosen to pursue opportunities at your newly launched venture. While I absolutely respect your right to build independently, I do hope you're aware of how this may be perceived by others, particularly in terms of solicitation, disruption, and professional boundaries. There it was. Not a direct accusation. Just a thinly veiled insinuation. The kind of email that doesn't say you're being unethical. It just wants everyone else to wonder if you are. I read it twice. Then a third time, slower. Each sentence was coded in concern but loaded like a weapon. The part that stung wasn't the content. It was the audacity. Because Jonah wasn't worried about ethics. He was worried about optics. He was worried people were choosing me quietly, freely, without any coercion. And that terrified him. I could have fired back. Could have buried him in receipts. I had Slack exports, ignored feedback surveys, meeting notes he never read. But instead, I opened a folder I'd created 6 months earlier. A quiet insurance policy. Inside were 4 emails I'd sent during my final year. All professional. All measured. Each one offering suggestions to improve team morale, address burnout, and restructure DevOps in a way that would actually scale. None had ever been acknowledged. All of them marked read. Avin. I bundled them into a PDF. No commentary, no embellishment. Just facts. Then I drafted my reply. Hi Jonah, appreciate your note. For clarity, I have not directly approached or recruited any of our former colleagues. All opportunities at Firebird have been shared publicly, and it seems some individuals found alignment with what we're building. For reference, I've attached several messages I sent during my tenure outlining ideas to improve retention, mentorship, and team health. I hope they're helpful in your continued efforts to build a stable, empowered engineering culture. Wishing you all the best. That was it. No snark. No threat. Just truth with teeth. I hit send and closed my laptop slowly. Not out of satisfaction. Out of finality. It didn't feel like a win. It felt like an exhale. Like surfacing from a long, silent dive and realizing just how long you'd been holding your breath. The silence afterward was beautiful. No reply. No rebuttal. Just a stillness that felt like someone finally realizing they couldn't rewrite the story anymore. And the best part? I hadn't thrown a single punch. Gravity had done the work. All I did was step out of the way. I was folding laundry when it happened. A notification popped up on my phone. Devon S. One of the engineers who had joined Firebird quietly a week earlier. Sharp. Introverted. The kind of guy who builds 5 fallback systems just in case one might fail. He never said much during meetings, but his pull requests were poetry. The message was short. Just got verbal from one of our old clients. They want to migrate their full ops stack to Firebird. Budget, $300. I read it once. Paused. Read it again. 300,000. I sat down hard on the edge of the couch, still holding a wrinkled towel in one hand. This wasn't a referral. This wasn't a pilot. This was a clienter real one putting their faith and their money on the table. And not just any client. It was one I had onboarded personally 3 years ago. The kind of account no one else wanted to touch because they were too demanding. I'd spent weekends rewriting their deployment pipelines, calming their CTO when production glitched, documenting their stack better than we documented our own. And after I left, they'd been ignored. Pushed down the queue. Handled by Jonah's latest efficiency hire who didn't know the difference between a rollback and a root cause. Now, they were walking. And walking to me. I didn't reply to Devon right away. I just stared at the message, letting the weight of it settle. Because this wasn't just revenue. It was validation. Proof that Firebird wasn't just an emotional refuge. It was a functional one. A better way of doing things that people could see, trust, and choose. And I hadn't had to pitch them. I hadn't emailed. I hadn't even known they were watching. They'd felt the shift, seen the turnover, and followed the trail of engineers leaving in quiet waves. Because in this industry, people talk. Whispers travel faster than newsletters. And reputation, the kind built in late nights and crisis calls, speaks louder than branding. What stunned me most wasn't that they left. It's that they remembered who built the system in the first place. Me. I closed my eyes, took a long, slow breath. There had been so many moments, dark ones, where I questioned if it had all been a waste. If all the unpaid weekends, the mentorships, the clean handoffs, the stability I created in silence, had just disappeared the moment I walked out the door. But now I knew better. Because it turns out, when you lead with clarity, people notice. When you build with integrity, people remember. And when you walk away quietly, but leave behind the blueprint, sometimes they follow it. This wasn't about taking something from my old company. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even about proving Jonah wrong. It was about proving myself right. That what I built had value. That my work wasn't just background noise. That showing up, day after day, even when no one clapped, meant something. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself to anyone. Not to a VP. Not to a client. Not even to myself. I just had to keep building. My last official act wasn't dramatic. No public post. No takedown thread. Just an email. Subject, thank you. It wasn't bitter. It wasn't laced with subtext. It was short, measured, gentle. I thanked the people I'd worked with for 7 years. Mentioned how much I'd learned from the code, from the pressure, from them. I didn't mention Jonah. Didn't need to. At the bottom, I added just one line. If you ever want to collaborate again, I'd love to stay in touch. I'm working on a new project. Something small, but growing fast. We're hiring, if you're curious. Firebird.dev/careers. I read it 5 times before scheduling it for 9 a.m. sharp, right as they'd be sipping lukewarm coffee in a meeting room, pretending everything was fine. I didn't write it for applause. I wrote it for closure. Because I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't even trying to prove a point. I just wanted people to know the door was open. Not a trap. Not a flex. Just a way out for anyone who needed it. And that, I realized, was the real difference. This had never been revenge. This had always been an invitation. An invitation to build better. To break cycles. To stop accepting less just because we were told it was industry standard. And the beautiful, painful truth? They read it like a threat. Because to a system that survives by keeping people quiet and compliant, hope is a threat. Options are a threat. Clarity is a threat. By noon, my inbox was full. Former colleagues. Junior devs. Even 2 people I never thought liked me. Messages like, I'm burned out. This feels human. I didn't know a place like this could exist. I'm in if you'll have me. I read every single one. Some made me laugh. Some made me tear up. One made me sit in silence for 10 straight minutes, just feeling the weight of it. And then, just before midnight, a final message rolled in. A forwarded screenshot from someone still inside the old company. Jonah, in an internal Slack thread, asking, does anyone know how to deploy without her scripts? There was no reply. Just a quiet thread of blue check silence. And I didn't feel triumphant. Not really. I felt steady. Like I was finally standing on solid ground that I'd built with my own hands. Not out of anger. Not out of ego. But out of love for the work, for the people, for the version of me that stayed up late hoping things could get better. And now, they had. If you've ever dreamed of building something better, now's your chance. Subscribe, share, and join the movement. This isn't about payback. This isn't about war. This is about walking away from the fire and building a place where no one else has to burn.